Greetings from Asia Pacific Secretariat. It's now midday in Bangkok, 12 noon here. And as usual, this will be a 90-minute long session. My name is Nirup Gelsen, and I'm from the APT Secretariat. And I would like to welcome everyone in this interesting episode on the lessons and opportunities for countering dis or misinformation in the Asia Pacific countries. This web dialogue series is organized, and this web dialogue is organized by Asia Pacific Telecommunity, and it is done in collaboration with Protection Group International. And for your kind information, Protection Group International has been part of Asia Pacific Telecommunity expert mission for the government of Thailand. And following a request from the National Cyber Security Agency, they have assisted in providing recommendations and guidelines for developing a national cybersecurity personal development plan. Due to some unavoidable circumstances, we have changes in our team today. However, this is going to be a very interesting discussion as we have people with expertise from diverse backgrounds. Without further ado, I'll now welcome Mr. Masanori Kondo, Secretary General of Asia Pacific Telecommunity, to kindly grace this session with his opening remarks. Kondo, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nidip. So good morning and good afternoon. So welcome to the APT Web Dialogue on lessons and opportunities for countering this misinformation in the Asia Pacific. The Asia Pacific region has been transforming into a digital society, and its speed and degree of change are significant. Incumbent media industries such as newspapers and TV are trying to catch up with these changes, while emerging and disseminated new ICT services are playing a new role as an information source, especially for the young generation. The digital transformation has brought many benefits, and at the same time, it also comes with some risks. One of such risks is the dissemination of disinformation and misinformation that would have a negative impact to generate societal mistrust. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic responses, many governments try to deliver correct and accurate information to the public, but sometimes we observed the proliferation of false information. So therefore, considering possible ways to tackle this issue is one of the urgent and important policy agenda for many governments. APT has attempted to address this issue and try to increase the awareness of the importance of this misinformation through various APT policy discussion platforms. This web dialogue is planned in this line, and I would like to extend our appreciation to PGI for their meaningful and timely proposal to organize this APT web dialogue. PGI has its expertise in this field. For example, as Nidep said, they support the APT's activity, and APT has been providing assistance to Thailand for the development of the National Plan for Cybersecurity Personnel. Today, the dialogue will focus on building understanding and awareness of these issues, starting with an overview of the evolution of misinformation and disinformation, followed by a panel discussion. I believe the discussion of the panelists who have different backgrounds and affiliation will be useful to provide various perspectives and widen your insights. Last but not least, I'd like to thank the moderator and the panelists for accepting our invitation. Due to some unavoidable situations, such as a positive case of COVID, some of the original speakers have been changed. So I apologize for these last-minute changes and appreciate the speakers who kindly accepted to join despite a very short notice. So I look forward to listening to a fruitful discussion and finding key takeaways from this APT web dialogue. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Secretary General Masanori Kondo, for your thoughtful opening remarks. With this, may I now introduce our moderator for today's session. In place of Beth Heffroth, we now have Ms. Lara Peace She is the head of the Capacity Building and Protection Group International. Please accept our warm welcome. Before I hand over the floor to you, we would like to take a group photo as we do in every web dialogue session. So for this, I'll request all the panelists to open your camera and take the picture. It may take just a few minutes. Okay, all right. If you can smile, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll now turn the floor over to Ms. Lara. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ned. That was really clever. I always forget to take the picture, so it was very clever to get it done right at the start. So just say a couple of words. So good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone joining us today, wherever you are around the world. We greatly appreciate you being with us today for this timely ATP web dialogue session. So my name is Laura Pace, and I'm the head of the capacity building practice at Protection Group International, PGI for short, and I'll be your moderator for this session. PGI is a British digital risk management and training company, offering a range of cybersecurity and digital investigation services and capabilities. I have been working at PGI since 2020 and previously have worked internationally in this space for the past 13 years. My current day job essentially is to work with governments or public sector entities to build digital resilience. The aim of our work is to help our clients navigate the complex and uncertain global 24/7 digital world, enabling them to understand and manage their risk exposure and ensure operational resilience. I would like to thank Secretary General Kondo and Dr. Jongbong Park and Nidup from APT for the opportunity to support today's session and to have the chance to share some of PGI's insights and experience working on countering misinformation and disinformation in the Asia Pacific. I am of course joined today by my PGI colleague, Patrick Wrigley, who is a principal analyst in our digital operations team at PGI and has kindly stayed up very late to join us from San Francisco Bay Area for this session. Patrick will deliver a presentation shortly to provide us with an overview on the evolution of misinformation and disinformation and influence operations. Following Patrick's presentation, we will then hear from our panelists. I am very happy to be joined today by an impressive panel of experts from across the Asia Pacific that will be sharing their own case studies and experience with us. And I hope this is going to be an information sharing experience and knowledge transfer opportunity for many of you today. This includes Professor Choi Yoon Kyung, and forgive me if I mispronounced that, Professor of Video Contents at the Peace Liberal Arts College, Hanshin University, and Editor-in-Chief of the Korean Society for Journalism and Communication Studies, and Mrs. Pongtip Thesafu, Chief Public Relations Officer, Anti-Fake News Center of Thailand, and Ms. Jeanette White, Head of Public Policy Asia Pacific at GSMA. Following our panelists, we will have time at the end for question and answer session, so please get your questions ready. But before I hand over to Patrick to provide his presentation, I just wanted to say a couple of words in terms of the evolution of building resilience in this digital space. Essentially, I started my career in 2008, 2009. And I remember our focus as an international community on really securing perimeters when we thought about cybersecurity. So a great focus on securing perimeters and looking at strategies and strategic solutions to do that. As time evolved, we started to look at behavior outside those perimeters and inside those perimeters. So we looked at skilling up people, understanding their behaviors, And now I think it's a very interesting time, because before we didn't really focus on content and information. We were just really heavily focused on those perimeters. So the discussion today obviously now starts to shift and look at information. And I think it's a very interesting time. Well, I feel very privileged to have been part of this international discourse and this evolution in thinking in terms of building national resilience. So before I hand over to Patrick, I just wanted to introduce him. So essentially, Patrick is an experienced social media intelligence analyst, identifying, monitoring, and attributing digital threats across social media platforms and online spaces. His work has led to takedowns of disinformation networks in a range of geographies. He manages projects related to election integrity, disinformation networks, and the digital footprint of dangerous organizations. Patrick is involved in designing and building national programs to counter disinformation and protect national critical functions. And Patrick and I work together in building national capability in this space. So I'm not going to take up more of the delivery of the actual succinct expertise. So I'm just going to hand over to Patrick. Patrick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Laura. I am going to just share some slides. It is not allowing me to share them now. NIDUP is the reason for that.
Let me check. I think you have their permission to share.
Okay, now I do. Thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, can you see these slides?
We cannot see your slides.
Let me try again. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you see them now? Okay,
yeah.
sorry about that.
They're in full
Technology
screen
company with technical glitches. I apologize for that. So as thank you, Laura. As Laura said, I'm going to give kind of a high level overview of the evolution and development of influence operations in the Asia Pacific and elsewhere, as we've been sort of tracking and monitoring them over the last 5 years. And I think using the kind of lens of influence operations as a way to get at the subject of mis and disinformation is kind of useful, because it focuses on behavior and infrastructure, and doesn't sort of exclusively focus on specific pieces of content. So influence operations primarily would use disinformation, that is deliberately misleading or false information, so spreading with intent. And it would occasionally amplify misinformation, so that would be misleading or false information that is circulating irrespective of any intent to mislead. But firstly, we need to kind of define what an influence operation is. And broadly speaking, it's an organized attempt to manipulate public debate or manipulate the perceptions and beliefs of a target audience. However, this kind of broad definition does present challenges, because it doesn't usefully distinguish between, say, a legitimate PR campaign and something more nefarious. What constitutes a problematic or hostile influence operation? The Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency, a body in Sweden responsible for countering disinformation, has created kind of a useful diagnostic for that based on 4 criteria. So for an influence operation to be hostile or problematic, there must be an element of deception. So the actor tries to influence opinion formation amongst an audience through deceitful means. That could be through false or misleading information, or it could be through the use of fake experts, for example. There must be an element of intent. So the actor intends to cause harm or undermine processes and institutions. And not only must there be an intent, but it must actually cause harm or undermine processes and institutions. So there must be some element of disruption. And finally, there must be an element of interference. So the actor is involving itself in a context in which it has no business to be involved. A sort of a primary obvious example of that would be a foreign state interfering in the sovereign affairs of another state, but it could equally be a special interest group, for example, a fossil fuel lobby group, for example, interfering deceitfully in environmental regulation processes, for example. And in terms of types of influence operation, there's often a misleading perception that it's almost the exclusive preserve of foreign entities or foreign states, but that is not really the case. Facebook's most recent report on influence operations, for example, on their platform and the behaviors exhibited in those operations, found that the highest activity was actually by domestic actors targeting domestic audiences, a much more significant level than actors targeting foreign audiences. And also in terms of the type of actors that engage in this activity, it is not the exclusive preserve of state entities. You have a whole range of actors engaging in this, from hacktivists or financially motivated clickbait farms, commercial entities, political parties, and special interest or advocacy groups. And so what makes a successful influence operation? Well, sort of broadly speaking, it requires 2 key ingredients. It requires generating credibility. So the content that is spread and the entities used to spread that content must be believable to an audience that is targeted. And secondly, it has to generate scale. So a single piece of erroneous content is likely to have limited impact and influence. It requires content to be spread at scale for it to generate influence. And how do influence actors do this? So firstly, how do they generate scale? They use a range of techniques to create content en masse. This includes using what the RAND Corporation has called the fire hose of falsehood. That is spraying an information environment with a high volume of erroneous or junk content in the hope that some of it will stick, or as a means of drowning out authoritative and factual information. So creating almost a white noise that pollutes the information environment and means that an individual user cannot find and access authoritative information. Threat actors also have and continue to build networks to spread misleading or incorrect information, and they often rely on inauthentic accounts to do this. So this is accounts that purport to be a certain individual or a certain entity, but are not, and that often don't contain personally identifiable information. Sometimes these networks of inauthentic accounts are automated, depending on the platform, but more frequently they are run and operated and managed by real people, such as in troll farms, and often outsourced to digital marketing firms. These networks, these inauthentic networks, engage in a range of behavior, from mass posting of certain hashtags or co-opting existing hashtags to mass posting of texts or website links. For example, we've frequently seen commercial entities in the Asia Pacific region mass posting links to websites containing erroneous information, seemingly as a way to direct traffic to these websites to generate revenue. So the motivation there is commercial rather than political or ideological. We also have seen inauthentic networks exclusively set up to mass comment across a range of social media pages and groups. This was the case with a digital marketing firm in the US during the 2018 midterm elections. They set up a high volume inauthentic network that posted comments across a range of political and news pages to try and counter messaging on those pages. However, while the use of inauthentic networks is still common, they often kind of lack sophistication and sometimes kind of stand out and lack credibility. And social media platforms have been getting better at detecting and disrupting these networks. And as such, there's been a refinement in how information operation actors approach the challenge at scale. So rather than relying on inauthentic networks, they have more recently, they often rely on co-opting or exploiting the voices of real people and real entities to push disinformation. They use these proxies to obfuscate the ultimate source of the information and to disassociate themselves from these disinformation narratives that they're posting and that they're initiating, and in some ways sort of laundering and generating credibility for that content. And they're also exploiting the scale provided by the audiences and networks that already follow these real journalists and real media. And they use a range of tactics to do this. We've seen examples of IO actors buying legitimate media entities to push their disinformation narrative, or hiring local influencers. Sometimes we've seen them just relying on journalists that are ideologically sympathetic to their cause to pick up their content, or even developing networks of fake freelance journalists that publish content on real news sites. There's also been a similar refinement in how IO actors approach the challenge of generating credibility. So traditionally in the last 5 years, this has been done basically by creating content that looks like authoritative sources. So an individual social media user often makes a subconscious judgment on whether content is reliable and credible based on peripheral cues, whether logos look like they're a real news organization, for example. And so IO actors will try and exploit that. They'll give an appearance of expertise. They will, as I said, will use a format that mimics authoritative sources. For example, we frequently see the use of what we call pseudo media sites. So these are websites that look like they are a traditional news site, but obfuscate the actual ownership and authorship of that news operation, and are used basically as a platform to initiate disinformation campaigns, but that look like real news sites. Actors are also always adapting and seeking new ways to generate credibility and trying to leverage and take advantage of emerging technology. And while we don't currently really see the successful deployment of deep fakes at scale as a key tactic of influence operations, we do see and believe that threat actors will start to adapt and continue to absorb new technologies in a bid to manipulate audiences and generate credibility. And so there's a constant race between those who produce disinformation and those trying to detect it to see who can be the quickest to absorb new technology and maintain an advantage in this space. But generating credibility is not only about the substance of content or visual cues. It's also about where that content is placed and who is posting it. Research in the sort of field of experimental psychology points to the fact that people are more likely to believe content if others believe it, and consequently that credibility increases when content is posted into a group to which a user belongs. In this sense, to some extent, credibility is defined by a community, is not an absolute thing, but is situational. And we have seen in the last couple of years that IO actors have kind of sort of learnt these truths and have started refining their approach to credibility in response to that. So we've seen a move from what Facebook calls wholesale activity, so bulk posting of disinformation content, to retail activity. That's smaller scale, it's targeted, and it's closer to the consumer or audience that the actor wants to influence. So we see IO actors trying to infiltrate closed online groups and communities, and specifically target influential actors and networks. And as they do this, they move into new spaces. So we see IO activity in messaging apps, across forums such as Reddit, and forums that are defined by single interest groups or by geography. And these IO actors are moving into this space to exploit real users and try and co-opt them to further spread disinformation. This also has an impact on the types of content that we see being spread by IO actors. So we still see them initiating disinformation, deliberately misleading or false content. We do see them amplifying misinformation, so taking advantage of incidental misleading or false content that's already circulating. But we've also seen a shift in that they're not only posting content that is actually false, but they're posting content into closed communities that seeks to foster polarization and seeks to reinforce extreme beliefs. And this points to some of the challenges and limitations of taking a content-first approach to disinformation campaigns and influence operations. Firstly, some of the content that is posted is non-falsifiable, so it's framed as opinion or hearsay and cannot be actually specifically proven wrong or explicitly fact-checked or debunked. A lot of the information doesn't violate any national legislation or even the regulations or terms of service of social media platforms. A lot of this content is not necessarily overtly political, and it's not necessarily hate speech, and would be considered on a content-only basis within the bounds of acceptable discourse. And as such, on this content basis, it is difficult to counter or enforce against. And so that creates a challenge as we look to counter disinformation campaigns and influence operations. A lot of activity in this space focuses on fact-checking alone, but without the support of other interventions, this can have limited impacts. And research does point to the fact that when fact-checking is not done correctly in terms of the timing of fact checks and debunks and the specifics of the messaging, it can actually, at worst, be counterproductive or just non-effective. Also, when we take this content approach, there is an issue in terms of those trying to debunk or counter disinformation, in that the national entities that may be doing this, or even the social media platforms that may be doing this, often lack the trust of or credibility with the audience that they're trying to reach. And finally, as we've kind of tried to show through this presentation, disinformation is successful not normally on a content basis, but because it is spread and initiated by a network of accounts and spread at scale. However, attempts to counter disinformation are often ad hoc or siloed within individual entities that aren't cooperating with each other. So disinformation is primarily networked, whereas the response to it is not. And so what this really means is that the efforts and challenges in countering disinformation are very similar to the challenges for those who are trying to spread disinformation. Namely that the issues are one of scale and credibility. And so in thinking about how one can counter disinformation, the primary things one needs to think about are how do we build scale in response to this, and how do we build credibility? And once these building blocks are in place, flowing from this, how do we build awareness and build deterrence? In our work at PGI, advising on approaches to countering disinformation, we've kind of built a model of what a digitally resilient national information environment might look like. And what it really rests on is that environment is networked, and it involves multiple stakeholders, both at the national, regional, and local government level, but also from civil society. And that could include NGOs, it could include media entities, academia, and other special interest and community groups. This is kind of provides a framework for cooperation across all relevant entities in an information ecosystem. And this model can be used to kind of assess the maturity of a given information environment. We believe you need to build common standards, processes, practices, and techniques to address the challenges of disinformation across a whole multi-stakeholder network. And if done correctly, this kind of whole of society approach not only brings scale to the practice of monitoring, detecting, and disrupting disinformation campaigns, but if comprehensive and across geography and across community, it also has the potential to increase credibility in responses to disinformation campaigns. And what does that look like in terms of kind of specifics? It means building processes, standards, tools, and techniques across all entities in that network. It means having transparent codes of conduct and ethical monitoring across nodes within that network. It means having both upstream monitoring, so trying to detect threat actors and those initiating disinformation campaigns, but also downstream monitoring, so trying to understand how an information ecosystem works, how disinformation flows through it, and how disinformation campaigns impact audiences. It also means assessing both the risks and vulnerabilities within an information environment, but also assessing and prioritizing the specific threats to that environment. And in terms of interventions, it means attempting to disrupt sophisticated networks spreading disinformation, but also forewarning the public about the behavior and signals associated with disinformation campaigns. And it also means becoming proactive in providing the infrastructure and developing the infrastructure to spread public service information on key critical issues of national importance. And if this is replicated across institutions and entities that represent different communities within this network, it has the potential to not only generate scale, but also to generate credibility. So thank you very much for listening. I will now pass you back to Laura.
Patrick, thank you so much for that overview. It is really important to note the multi-stakeholder, multi-disciplinary approach to countering disinformation and really understanding how disinformation manifests, understanding your environment and really building this network or forum to be able to mitigate against this threat. So I think what we will do now is we've got a 30-minute panel, and I am going to first invite Professor Chae Eun-kyung, and I really hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, correct. Yeah,
Oh,
but
awesome.
you can just call me just Choi. Yeah. Same
Okay.
place, it's okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over the floor to you, and you've got 10 minutes, if that is okay. And then we'll have other interventions from our panelists. And we'll have a discussion.
Okay. Am I the first? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, sure. Right. So let me share the slide. Okay.
Thank you very much. And I imagine you're joining us from Seoul.
Oh, yes. I am in Seoul, and we had a big rain last night. Excuse me, I can't really share my slides. Anyone can help me? Yeah, I can. Yeah. Right. Okay. Can you see?
Yes.
Yeah. Sure. Right. Yeah. in 10 minutes. So I'm very glad. Can I start to see all my slides?
Of
Yeah,
course.
okay, good.
The floor
Right,
is
great.
yours.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in Seoul, Korea, and I'm very glad to introduce about Korean case. And thanks for the wonderful presentation. And also, again, I'm to Patrick particularly. Yeah. And at the end of your slides, I'm not sure whether the Korean government and also in Korean case, all of Korean people who are really crazy for the fact checking and those kinds of phenomenon, whether we are on the track of finding the standard and to find a very good and proper skills or whatever, but let's see. And I'm from Hanshin University. I'm working at Hanshin University, a professor, and my title is about fact-checking experience and effect in South Korea at this moment, right? This is my content, so I'm gonna start from the broad background to the conclusion. Yeah, I do know quite well about our very dramatic moment in 2016, like a candlelight protest. So after the protest, we've been changing the impeachment of former President Park. It was the first female president, but unfortunately, yes. So we changed it during her term. We changed the president. And then following the year, we had a presidential election, and this March again we had a presidential election. So politically, we had a very dramatic moment, and between presidential election, we had a local election and also extra. The reason why I started with the election, like 2016 in US, France, Germany, again, we had a very serious phenomenon with the fake news. So socially, and lots of people and even press and academia like me, we've been focused on the phenomenon, how we can actually make it better, and how we can understand that situation. So at that moment, I have to start from this 2016 and 2017. Yeah, I was on the peak of the issue of fake news. So at that moment, we had a reaction from the national level, like a public level. So this is the website from the National Election Commission. So that time, the commission also very immediately reacted and also response for the fake news exactly before the election. And then one of the independent academic institution, later I'm going to introduce the fact check. So that time they adapted that kind of a skill from the Polycheck in the US, as you don't know, so like 6 scales. So immediately they also try to check whether all the political candidates about their speech and their announcement, whether it's true or not, or false or not, something like that. So that level also happened. And again, from public broadcasters like KBS, and also this is the youngest broadcaster, the JTBC. Later, they made a kind of a special session to fact check. The session name is a fact check. It was also first time, even include their own news. They try to check the fact, whether it's false or not. And then it had lots of influence on the other broadcasters, but during the election time, they also made the special sections. And 2020, 2 years ago, they also get a kind of a certificate, like kind of improvement from the IFCN, as you don't know about the International Fact Checking Network. They became the first and the one member at this moment. And during the election time, 2017, again, one of the independent online media, one of the very influential media, and then they adopted a kind of system, citizen inspection team. So they recruited to everyone, every single citizen can join to prove all the candidates' announcement or something. And so this is the kind of the mainstream from the Korean government, and also what the Korean press and researchers and academians made a kind of social consensus to move and focus on the issue of fake news. So at this moment, we called at that moment, 2016 and 17, we all called even the assembly members and the broadcasters all just called fake news. But the fake news itself may be kind of very negative awareness, and also people debated and argued what is the fake news, like Trump's influence, something. So we changed the words. I mean, like when publicly, when we call it like disinformation. But as you don't know, disinformation, misinformation is slightly different. So we wanted to approach about the fake information, fake news. So later in pandemic in COVID-19, like last year before the election this year again, we are moving towards like a fact-checking. So like a fact-checking policy, fact-checking movement, fact-checking culture is to include the fake news and disinformation and even the deepfake due to the economic and algorithm and computational technologies, and even let's make kind of a more participatory culture to check the fact. It linked and connected to the literacy education again. So let me just to introduce currently what we are doing from the public level to the private level. So like the lawmakers, assembly members, they try to make the new law, but because of the kind of very controversial argument, and so we try to, okay, let's make the new law, but change their mind. Okay, let's amend the previous law. So this is one of the article, but still it's going on. So like Press Arbitration Act, let's amend Press Arbitration Act. But on the other hand, lots of broadcasters and then journalists, they actually fight with the press freedom. Let's see how we actually make the amend or make the new law. Meanwhile, the government bodies like KCC, Korean Communications Commission, and also Korea Communication Standard Commissions and Press Arbitration Commissions, they made a kind of very serious response and some new projects. So how they can respond and protect from the fake news before the election, what we can do, because the president election every 5 years, but local election every 4 years. We have lots of elections and some political the events as well. So national election commissions, even under the KCC, like a Community Media Foundation and Korea Press Foundation, nowadays they made and running lots of interesting literacy programs like this, like fact check campaigns, I call it. So their philosophy and their aim is more prevent or improve awareness of fact check, because still they don't believe this is the true news, or although there is a fake news anyway. So the foundation, we try to make a kind of a public open campaigns to make the kind of the icon. And this is the second year and third year, like a fact check week festival. And this is for the children, like from the school. They encourage lots of the public school to join for the kind of campaign and other extra, or even for the teenagers fact-checking hackathon kind of thing. And this year, like a KCC, the government body, they made a new program to support, to make the university course opening. So call it fact-checking. My university, I also made one lecture in order to teach you about the technique and skills of fact-checking, like the Excel skill and also the, I don't know, Python. So using the Python and Excel programs and other programming system to learn how to check the fact. And something extra learn. And then I have to introduce the two independent, very interesting fact check group as a game, like a fact check, SNU fact check, actually Seoul National University Institute of Communication Research. They established in 2015, but at that time they wanted to try to check about kind of very general disinformation, but it actually collaborated, and also they so far has been verified more than 10,000 facts, and also vetted and verified by participating media companies like 27 newspapers, broadcasting, communication, and online media companies. Yep, still going on, but this is another new young one. And also this is having some government support, like from the KCC and also Korea Media Foundation. Last year they established it, and then they crowdsourcing open platform. They also co-founded by 4 organizations. As you can see, Korea Broadcasting Journalist Association, Korea Journalist Association, and Producer Association. And again, like a party, this is more independent technical platform company. Actually, they historically the party, the company, independently, they made and contributed to make an online community, which makes it politically and economically make a lots of influence 5 or 10 years ago. Anyway, then a non-political, non-profit public information service. And then they also very actively make the kind of a course to teach how to check the fact again. And then they also monthly have the project and have the fact check hackathon and citizen fact check contest, fact checking exhibition, and much more actively they make a kind of movement again. And finally, I can tell about the Korean fact checking governance, like in the government level with the lawmakers, they are actually really seriously fighting to change it and amend the law and extra. And the press, they also collaborate and also join to the SNU or fact check net or extra whenever they need to check, or independently, they also try to check the facts and try to open the process in order to make the very transparent system. And then school and university level, whenever school and university want to join to learn about the skill, and they can join and they can learn, and even they can make the new course and something like that. So yeah, so far I just try to introduce about the Korean case, how very serious, what Korean government and also Korean citizen level do actively try to join to the kind of global phenomenon to make a better society. But yeah, I am very happy to hear and to learn and more other wonderful cases. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jay. I think that was really interesting, and obviously ensuring that there is proper access to information, especially from a journalistic point of view, is incredibly valuable. So thank you so much for giving us Korea's perspective. If I may now invite Mrs. Pongtep Tesafu to give us Thailand's perspective. You are on mute.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm actually was just informed yesterday that I have to participate in this session. So sorry that I don't have any presentation, but I'll just talk about our anti-fake news center. Okay, is that what you are interested to hear? If that's so, yeah. Because that was I was informed to talk about.
Thank you.
Right. Okay, and perhaps the presentation will be sent to the meeting after all. I mean, after we finish. Okay, the Thailand actually is one of the top countries for social media users. We have 76 million people, and we have about 54 millions of accounts of Facebook alone, okay? And also with Line application, it's like 40 million something, 40 million accounts something. And as you may know, the convenience of the social media comes before the literacy of how to use it properly. Okay, so people at some ages and some groups, they are enjoying sharing information. Just read and then share, read and then send over. Not even sometimes consider whether that is the right fact or false fact. Okay, so that's happening more and more. So then the government thinks they have to do something to prevent people from being cheated from by false news or information. Some of the major publications or TV or media, they launched the program called like check before sharing or make sure before you share. Okay, but that is just only for themselves until the Ministry of Digital for Economy and Society decided to set up this anti-fake news center, okay, 3 years ago. And I think we've been somehow successful to a certain level whereby people access to us and really get the information from us and then share. Okay, also with the media as well. So what are we doing? Actually, this center is run by a company that is very specialized in social listening and social monitoring. So they really read the information and sometimes analyze the trend, okay, that could become fake news. All right, and then with that is one part, and the other part is also we inform people that if you feel that you're not sure about this or you kind of have a doubt, so send us the information. So we have we establish about 4 or 5 communication channels where people can send the information that they want us to check. Okay, so we start checking. But of course, there's a lot of information sent to us, but we divide it into, categorize into 4 groups according to you call like the popularity of fake news. Okay, so that 4 groups being the healthcare first, products and healthcare. And second one is about economy. Okay, third one is about disaster. And the 4th one is the government's policy. Okay. And with this establishment, with the companies receive all this information and then analyze whether first round. And we have established the government networks. We have, at the moment, we have about 300 government units recheck that information, whether that's true or not. Okay, and with that networking with the government, at least within 3 or 4 hours, they have to send us the right answer, whether that proved by them. Okay, when Patrick mentioned about credibility, that's why we have to have government, because at least government to the people, they are still, the most credible organization. So that's why we have 300 of them checking whether this is a real disaster, or this is a real policy, or this is whether this is the right scheme from the government, or this is a good product or not, harm to health or not. So FDA played major roles in for us. Okay, Ministry of Public Health, particularly during COVID time, in the last 2 years. And after we analyze and prove by the government, then we rewrite the information into an easy reading kind of thing and post it back to the social media channels that we own, like with the website, in the Line application, in the Facebook, and what else? We have, hang on. Twitter. Okay, so and people then people come and check from there. Okay, and then they can just share to their friends or to their in the network whether this is the right information. And also after 3 years, we've become one of the source for medias or some TV or newspaper, they also online news, they can also check with us and then release that again. So far the logo of the the center, which is like, you know, this is the kind I would show you later on. It's become known now to public that once you have this logo, means it is the true information. Okay, so that's what we have done so far. And within these 3 years, we have about, I just want to show you some figures, just a minute. Okay. Facebook. It's just like about 2 million something, you know, people, I mean, the amount of the people check in or check with us, we count the numbers at 2 million, 2.2 million something, that people come and check the fact from us, and it's still happening every day. So it's not bad, you know. At the beginning, we thought that it's very difficult, you know, how do we, how can people know about this center? And of course, setting up by the government, people believe also that, is this the government's tool to only talk about the government's policy? Okay, whereby you don't talk about the opposition policy at all. You may say that this is like, okay, anything that come out from the opposition party, you say, well, this is the false information. So that was a real, a very difficult challenges that we had so far. But for now, after 3 years, I think people seem to believe that, you know, we really sent out the useful information, and the accuracy of the government units that we've been working with, they're quite okay. So people are happy with the information we disseminate out. Okay, so that's all about Thailand at the moment. We can say that we still have to do more PR on this. Okay, because it's not everyone, you know, Thailand is here, there, and as long as if the government really talking about this, you know, if they keep on saying that, okay, we have this center, you can check it, this, that, so that's going to be useful. So I can see that the success of this center, you know, depends a lot of PR of from the center itself, whereby the government talked about it, people come and check, and the information is correct. And also, if the online newspaper, online channels, you know, take this information from us and then they publicize it, there's also also make us the center become more known and help to people. So I think that's the information I can share with you at this moment. Okay.
Thank you so much. It's very interesting to hear about the establishment of your center and what it is looking to do, and also the credibility component, which Patrick referenced in his presentation, is absolutely key in any kind of intervention in this space. I'm not going to open the floor to questions, and I'm sure that participants would like to ask questions already, but I'm just going to hand over the floor to Jeanette White from the GSMA for her intervention. Jeanette, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, I haven't got any slides too, but I did have a little bit more warning than Pongtip, so mine was on purpose not to do slides. First of all, thank you very much for inviting the GSMA to participate in this very important topic. Some of you on the call might not even heard of what the GSMA is. So let me just give you a brief, very brief. The GSMA represents the interests of the mobile industry, the mobile network operators globally. So every and the wider ecosystem. So all mobile operators are more or less a member of GSMA. So that's just to give you background so you know where I'm coming from. Because Professor Choi and Pongrit, it was very much from a government and education and civil society. So you're going to hear something slightly different from me. So, but hopefully that will add to the mix and make it more of a dynamic conversation. So GSMA's vision is to unlock the full power of connectivity so that all people and industries and societies can thrive. For this to happen, it's essential that people operate in a safe and trustworthy online environment. Online mis- and disinformation has the potential to undermine trust, and with a lack of trust, this can limit the adoption and continued use of digital technologies. Although mobile operators do not typically host content, the mobile industry is sometimes affected by false information. For example, mobile operators have been the target of misinformation around 5G and COVID-19. Mobile operators often feel the effects of the countermeasures used to address online information, such as the use of a network shutdown to slow the spread of information. So the impact of false information on the internet is being acutely felt here in Asia Pacific region. This is why we're having this conversation now. And as Pongrit mentioned, Asia Pacific, she said in Thailand, but Asia Pacific is home, and Professor Choi will know this, to some of the largest and fastest growing online communities in the world.
Right.
For example, the region accounts for the majority of social media users in the world. 7 of the 20 largest Facebook markets, 7 of the 20 largest Twitter markets, and 6 of the 20 largest Instagram markets are in the Asia Pacific region. And I'm sure there's probably, I haven't got TikTok, but probably we could go onto that and we'd probably be one of the, be in the top one there. So the impact of misinformation and disinformation are enormous. We've heard that from the conversations today. So I'm not really going to go into the detail of that. But what I wanted to do is to say, we felt this was really important. This is over a year ago. And we issued a report last July, and it's called Exploring Online Misinformation and Disinformation in Asia Pacific. And I think that's been put in the chat. So the goal of this report was to examine the effects of stakeholders as they seek to balance the impact of false information and to assess the impact of various countermeasures. Because when you do something, there's always a countermeasure to whatever you do. And I think we've heard that from Professor Choi and Pongtip. You know, do you trust the government? You know, can you say that? So those are all sorts of things that we need to highlight. So our report highlighted that there were 4 major groups of stakeholders that are involved in efforts to address false information online. The first one is the ICT industry players. And what I'm meaning here is like the social media platforms. They have a role to play. Governments, as we've heard, citizens and citizens organizations. And then actually we as mobile operators and other telecom service providers. I'm not going to talk about the other 3 because that's in the report we do talk about that. So I'd urge you to have a look at that. But what I wanted to do is to just talk a little bit about the role of the mobile operators and what can they do. So mobile operators and telecom service providers sit in a unique position on this issue. They provide the connectivity that powers online communities, acting as a transport layer for content, but are subject to laws on the confidentiality of communication and typically do not host content. So with this in mind, in addition to the fact that many browsers, servers and communication services are encrypted from end to end, much of the responsibility to mitigate the spread of false information really falls outside the purview of the operators. Having said that though, and often there is a misconception that operators may be to blame for the spread of negative content. However, we mobile operators are trying to do something to address this false information. So I'd just like to mention 2 things that the industry is doing specifically to address this. And the first one is promoting trustworthy sources. But again, so with large subscriber bases, and the mobile industry has a very high level of trust with a number of people. Not always, I know there are some issues, but we do generally are a trusted supplier, and so with our established customer relationships, operators can play a supportive role by pointing customers towards useful information on relevant issues from credible sources. Some operators have also warned customers of potential cyber fraud and offered advice on how to stay safe while connected. So I'll give you an example. In Indonesia, during the pandemic, all operators came together to disseminate trustworthy information by broadcasting SMS messages on a daily basis with COVID-19 related information from reliable sources. And as we've heard, from Professor Choi and Pondit, the enhancing digital literacy is absolutely essential. That's, let's start from that point. So operators can and have taken proactive steps to promote connectivity as a platform for collaboration, entrepreneurship, and freedom of expression, and provided training courses. So I as I mentioned at the beginning, there are countermeasures that we can do. We're looking at, checking, fact checking, and all those things. However, I think there's a word of caution I'd just like to mention. That some countermeasures may have consequences that should not be underestimated. First, the approach of sanctioning individuals and groups for posting false information comes with the risk of violating international standards on human rights and freedom of expression. It also, has the potential to limit the creation of valuable digital content and services as a result of self-censorship. Second, there are valid concerns around provisions on traceability in some countermeasures and how weakening encryption could undermine the digital security and privacy of individuals. Therefore, we believe guidelines should be targeted specifically to slow or stop the dissemination of viral content at issuance. For example, guidelines should target hosting services that play an active role in the dissemination of content online, share such content with a broad audience, or have the technical means to swiftly identify and remove user-specific content on a piece-by-piece basis. So I'd also like to highlight one thing that actually I don't think it's been mentioned here, but internet shutdowns are sometimes a way that governments deal with to limit the flow of information, but they have risks. Internet shutdowns can undermine users' trust in the internet, with a knock-on effect for the advancement of the digital economy and the reliability of critical online government services. They also come with challenges. So, for example, it's an economic impact. So society increasingly relies on internet connectivity, and these can be severely disrupted by reducing if we have an internet shutdown. So mobile operators are directly, as I mentioned at the beginning, impacted by internet shutdowns, as well as other measures to counter false information online. In addition to the loss of revenue caused by a shutdown, mobile operators also face reputational damage, pressure from authorities, and possibly even retaliation from the public as a result of these countermeasures. So I think in sort of coming to a little bit of a summary is, I think it's fair to say that we're all struggling with the issue of misinformation, disinformation, which is likely to grow further and change as technology evolves. For example, the immersive nature of the metaverse could risk exacerbating the spread of misinformation. So in February this year, the GSMA published a report exploring the metaverse and the digital future. So for any of you who are on this call now, you might want to have a look at it. It's a very good primer if you want to know what is the metaverse, what are the opportunities, which sectors are likely to benefit from the metaverse. And in the report, we also highlight there are multiple barriers to the development of a thriving metaverse that works for everyone. First and foremost, ensuring trust and safety online is a major challenge, with issues such as abuse, bullying, and harassment particularly problematical when they impact the well-being of children and vulnerable groups. Challenges relating to cybersecurity, data privacy, and false information are also likely to intensify, and therefore we need to think about, what our oversight mechanisms are fit for purpose when we move into the metaverse. So I'm saying this is something we need to look for. It's not here yet, but as Professor Choi knows, it is actually there quite well in that career. There are already lots of examples of the metaverse. So as there are many different forms of threat, there is no threat to online safety. There's no one way to address all the issues. We talked, I think, Professor Choi mentioned about the governance circle. A trustworthy digital environment is one way to address all of these issues. and it's paramount to fully realizing the benefits of digitization and efforts to ensure this trust must be collaborative. I think we've all sort of said that, multi-stakeholder effort by government, industry and citizens. I'll just give you the one last thing. I know I've maybe run over my time, but I just wanted to mention we had a conference last week in Singapore where trust was the key theme, and many speakers from government to industry to NGOs shared their views on this important issue. So with GSMA, we're here, this is continuing conversation. We believe this is not, we can't solve it all at once. It won't ever be solved. We will always be looking at ways to address these issues. So thank you very much for your time and listening to me. Probably go over too much.
No, that was perfect. Thank you so much for providing an industry perspective. I think it's really interesting to see the different perspectives across the panel. And I think for me, the takeaway from the conversation today is really to stress and reinforce the message that it needs to be not only multi-stakeholder, but when we're talking about building national resilience in this space, we really need to also think about having as broad and as comprehensive an approach as possible, premised on national cooperation. So having all these stakeholders work together, but not having, not lacking the breadth in a national approach, making sure that all options work together and not being short-sighted. And of course, the threat is always developing, and we're always going to have to keep pace as actors mature and the risk matures. So we've got a couple of questions in our Q&A box. So I'm just going to pose them to you, and I'll invite our panelists and Patrick, if you wish to respond. So there's this one from Jong Bong. So as each coin has two sides, the other side of disinformation, misinformation might be censorship. And there are a number of cases in the Asia Pacific region on this debate that government wishes to control information. So validating the information, of course, is important in this sense. So how to enhance the credibility of validating the information whilst walking and navigating the space of censorship. Professor Choi mentioned open process of fact-checking governance framework should work. And this question is to all of the panelists. Who would like to go first? Anybody? Professor Choi, can I come to you?
Yeah, sure.
So the floor is yours.
I thought you want to have some question to me. Okay. Actually, I couldn't mention about the limit. I mean, about this current policy and the movement in Korea. After I heard about the presentation from Patrick and also from other two panel presentation, I again realized what kind of limits we very correctly do have. As I do at the beginning, introduce about our political situation. Yeah, the election and such kind of the political economic situation is our kind of the first and the urgent situation to sort it out. However, as academia and researcher, I was wondering, even I wasn't quite sure about those kind of movement to see about. At this moment, we do not mention even about the fake news. Like whoever to mention about the fake news is kind of, okay, let's fight. you want to actually to prove what is the false and truth or something like. So to going to at the really beginning. So let's move on. Let's move to the other next step to see about the fact checking. Then I slightly wondering, like whenever we talk about the fact checking, the techniques and skills and the system and extra, the fundamental phenomena, like the problem is maybe slightly going to be more smooth or more like, the weak. Are going to be a little bit weak because the fake news is like even the deep fake. It's really serious. It's not really harming to the political situation. as you do know, all shared about even in Thailand, like during the Korean pandemic, we had a lots of fake news. And even during the war in Russia and Afghanistan, and even suddenly, in Russia and which country? I'm so sorry, like
Ukraine.
Ukraine.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, Ukraine. And like during even the Ukraine war, we had a very limited report about the war. Yeah, because we are very closely like American viewpoint and perspectives. Lots of Korean even journalists do not allow to report from the local itself, Ukraine. So lots of information even actually locked it. We have kind of one way to see and to understand about the all global issues. At that moment, I thought kind of the fake news is that really right way to see and move from the fake news issue to the fact checking or literacy issue? We have to actually move all together. I personally think. So I just wanted to hear about your opinion and something. Yeah.
I think in answer to John Bong's question, and obviously if anybody wants to jump up and add any more commentary to Professor Choi, I think the answer to that is really ensuring that approaches are networked and multi-stakeholder, and you have this open forum composed of different stakeholders with different interests that come together to cooperate. I think that is the only way really you can navigate the space and build like trust when countering this.
Yeah. Could I just add to that? I think, it's one of the points that I made is actually, when you start, checking news and filtering news, then you're at risk, because who's the right person to do that? It is always a, big risk, particularly on political and so, like if you're checking the product's quality, I think that's a different matter. It's sort of an easier thing to sort of do, not necessarily from, you may disagree with me on that, but that there is always, that's why there's always a countermeasure, that you can marginalize people, you could, so it is something that I think we keep talking about multi-stakeholder coming together. I think we know that has to be done, but I don't see fora really where it really happens as much as it should do, perhaps. I think we've got all the different groups working together, but perhaps there is a need to actually have something a little bit more formal on that, so that we can, make sure that we're not going too extreme on, filtering news, because that's not good for anyone.
Yeah. Anybody else on this, or can I pose the next question? Okay, so the other question in the box is how do you measure the impact of disinformation and then evaluate what the impact of your countermeasures? This is something.
I can have a go. I mean, I can't measure the fact of but I do have some data points on impact of countermeasure, which I should share with you. It doesn't answer the question completely, but this is, remember when I talked about that, if you have network shutdowns, this has an economic impact. So there was I've got a data point here that might be useful. So the Digital Security and Rights Group, top 10 VPN, estimates there were over 27,000 hours of intentional internet shutdowns. This was in 2020, which cost the global economy 4 billion in lost productivity. So that's just one data point there to give you about the countermeasures. Now, the false information, I haven't got any data on that. Maybe my other colleagues or someone does have that, but I just thought I'd come in with that piece.
Awesome. Anybody else?
I would say in terms of measuring the impact of disinformation, it's kind of the holy grail for researchers, and there's a whole range of challenges in sort of fully understanding impact and what that means, not least the fact that actual data across social media platforms is not always available for researchers. So fully understanding the reach of disinformation and then how it's absorbed by different audiences is extremely difficult to sort of quantify specifically. The metrics that people have access to are fairly limited and don't tell the whole picture. I think trying to sort of what we call downstream monitoring, so understanding how disinformation flows through an information environment. So looking at how it can circulate either within an echo chamber or like jump between different communities is one way at crudely getting at the sense of how disinformation impacts different audiences and communities. Some recent research has talked about using a breakout scale for understanding the impact of disinformation. So does it circulate exclusively within one community, or does it jump between communities? Is it circulating in one language or multiple languages? And trying to understand scale and impact sort of that way qualitatively, and having risk assessments based on that. And then in terms of how you measure the impact of countermeasures from a potentially positive perspective, it would depend specifically on the intervention. So for example, one intervention, if a network is spreading disinformation that violates the terms of service of a social media platform, and you work to get that disrupted and taken down, you can instantly measure the impact there in terms of the proliferation of those specific disinformation narratives, and then continue to monitor to see if that network is rebuilt and that information reappears. If you're looking at countermeasures that directly confront disinformation, but rather are based on positive fact-based public service messaging that are looking to sort of displace disinformation narratives around certain keywords and hashtags, there are all sorts of metrics you could use to see if reliable information about COVID-19 that is put out, public service information about COVID-19, for example, ranks more highly on search engine results or across different social media platforms than a potential disinformation narrative on COVID-19, for example. So there are quite useful ways of measuring the impact of certain interventions, I think. But in terms of measuring the impact of disinformation and disinformation campaigns, that's more challenging and problematic. And it's still, in terms of just like understanding the challenges themselves, there's still fairly limited research in this area, I think.
But do you think it's fair to say that it's going to get, like if, I mentioned about with new technologies that, things are going to get even more, there's more opportunities for misinformation, disinformation at a different level. So potentially the threat is even bigger. So even if we can't measure it now, we need to start thinking about it. That's why, I specifically mentioned the metaverse. I'm not saying that we should be, and I'm not going for 1 minute saying we should, regulate the metaverse, but I'm just saying that we need to understand the differences in the metaverse, because it's an immersive technology. It's slightly different, be touched or something, the feeling that it's a whole new ball game that we have to think about. And, as government regulators on this call and that's something, really seriously to start planning for now.
Absolutely. I think that's a key point across this whole space is proactivity. And like the state we are currently in is fairly reactive, I think, and we're behind the ball game. And it's planning and understanding both risks, so vulnerabilities in an information space or system, whether that be the metaverse or traditional social media platforms, and then also understanding threats. So who are the actors, what types of behavior do they engage in, and really getting trying to sort of forecast activity based on that. And yeah, I think as you say, trying to get really proactive in this space.
True.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I think we're good on the question side. Okay, so there's just one last question, which I'm going to ask the panel, and it is, do you have examples or models for effective capacity building projects to build local capacity to mitigate disinformation? Can I ask any of my colleagues?
I'm not sure if I understand 100%.
I think at the moment, in terms of capacity building, I think it seems like what we're doing here today is a very good example of a capacity building type of activity, because it's still evolving. Therefore, we sort of, everybody, all those key stakeholders that, we mentioned, they've all got a role in capacity building, whether it's the platform players, governments, civil society, our industry ourselves, telecom service providers, we all have a role to play. I don't think there's a cookie cutter thing that we can just roll out, like, you can do a spectrum course or something, you can do spectrum management. This is quite complicated, multi-stakeholder. My personal view is that the more we, get different people across the different talking together like this, so we can share information, that is probably a better way forward.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that comment. I think also just in relation to the capacity building space, there's something, well, it's my day job, essentially working with governments or public sector entities and encouraging and building that multi-stakeholder forum, formalizing it, ensuring, as per Patrick's presentation, ensuring that there is the right framework and ensuring that there is a code of conduct and international standards-based approaches. So I think we have no more time left today, unfortunately, but I've really, yeah. Is there somebody who's going to come in? Nope. Okay. I've really enjoyed the conversation today. But unfortunately, we're running out of time. Of course, I would like to thank all my panelists for their interventions and my colleague Patrick for his presentation. And special thanks to APT for coordinating this event. And we very much look forward to continuing this discussion and working with the Asia Pacific community to share knowledge and strengthen efforts for countering misinformation and disinformation. I would particularly like to thank Secretary General and John Bong and Nida. I'm going to hand over the floor back to you. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Lara, for your very excellent moderation. And of course, I would like to thank on behalf of our Secretary General and the Secretariat. I would like to thank Mr. Patrick for his holistic presentation, and of course our three distinguished panelists who made this session very lively and informative through their expert views and thoughts. Lastly, let me thank all the participants for taking your time to attend this session. We will put our survey link in the chat box, and we request all the participants to spare a few minutes to fill it up. It's going to be very useful to us. Let me stress, it's going to be very useful to us to improve our future web dialogues. And with this, let me also update you on the upcoming web dialogue session, which is scheduled on 23rd August. It will be from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Bangkok time. So please don't forget to tune in. This is again going to be another interesting session. With this, I think we have come to the end of our session. And thank you very much. Until then, take care and good luck. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.